Far away on the outskirts of a small town, long accustomed to its legends, there was a forest about which only whispers. Whispering Forest. No one knew how old he was, but the elders claimed that his trees had been there long before the first settlers appeared. The forest was alive. Not in the sense that all trees are alive, but something different, ancient and creepy. The locals avoided it by telling each other strict prohibitions. Never go in there after dark, never say your name out loud, and most importantly, never listen to the wind. But Alex didn't believe in legends. He was an ordinary boy with dreams. But inside of him there was a thirst for the unknown. He wanted to know the truth. Could it not be that the whole forest, just a collection of old trees and the occasional rustle of leaves, is really dangerous? He heard a story that the forest can fulfill wishes. You just have to stay there for the night and listen to the whispers of the wind. "It's just stupid fairy tales," he laughed once. "The forest can't talk." But soon he will understand. He was very much mistaken. Dark path. One evening, when the sun was tinging the sky with crimson-orange hues, Alex went into the forest. He told his mother that he was holding on to the other, but in fact, his path lay right in the middle of the whispering forest. With each step, the trees grew taller, the branches thicker, and the air quieter. He was expecting the usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the screams of birds, the chopping of twigs under his feet. But there was nothing in the consultation. Full, pressing silence. His skin was covered with lice. The silence was wrong. But Alex kept going. Step, step, step. And suddenly there was a whisper. Quiet, barely perceptible, as if the wind itself began to speak with him. "Alex ... He turned sharply, but there were only trees around. "Alex, come on." The voice was not frightening. On the contrary, he spoke softly, almost affectionately. Curiosity has taken over. "Who's here?" he asked quietly. The answer was laughter, a thin, barely perceptible laugh, as if the wind had come upon him. And suddenly, he saw them. When Alex saw them, he was breathless. At first they looked like ordinary trees, crooked, old, with clumsy and coarse bark. But when he came closer, his stomach twisted. Face, hundreds of them, carved in bark. Their mouths were open in silent cries, their eyes were empty and lifeless. Each face was different, unique. Men, women, children. Some had expressions of horror, others, sadness. And although the thread was old, some were so fresh that it seemed like they had been added only moments ago. Alex held out his hand, fingers on the nearest one. The tree was warm, pulsating, alive. A sudden gust of wind blew through the trees. "Keep going." The whisper wrapped around his ears like invisible fingers, urging him deeper. But now the words no longer seemed tempting. They looked hungry. Alex pulled his hand from the tree. His heart was beating against his ribs. He turned to leave. But the forest had other plans. The path that disappeared. There was no way back. Where there once was a path, now there were only more trees, more darkness, more faces. As if the forest had completely swallowed up its way to retreat. The panic has flooded his vein. He ran, running through the undergrowth, avoiding the branches that seemed to be reaching for him, scratching his skin like a desperate hand. But no matter how far he ran, he found only more trees, more faces, and the whispers grew louder. "Stay with us. You don't have to go. We will give you everything you ever wanted." His knees were bent. His breathing became intermittent. Then he saw movement at the corner of his eye. Something was standing between the trees, watching, waiting. It wasn't a man. Alex's lungs were burning as he forced himself to keep moving. But no matter how fast he ran, the trees around him seemed to move and rearrange themselves, trapping him in an endless labyrinth of darkness and distorted faces. The whispering was no longer tender. He was furious, insistent, desperate. "You don't have to go. You belong here. Stay." The voices no longer sounded like the wind. They were closer, more human, more insistent. Then the shadows moved before him. The figure has come forward. At first, he looked like a human, but when he came out of the dark, Alex realized it was something else entirely. The creature's skin was knotted and rough like a tree bark. The fingers were elongated and split, as if they had once been roots. The eyes, if they were eyes, were deep, empty emptiness that seemed to draw in the darkness around them. And when he spoke, his mouth did not move. "You've been listening for too long," he said. The voice was like every whisper he had ever heard, multi-layered, clunky, ancient. "The forest will not let you go, if you do not offer something in return." Alex shuddered. "What do you mean?" The figure bowed her head, contemplating. Whispering voices around him died down. The whole forest was waiting. Then he spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Sacrifice what you love." It made Alex feel cold on his back. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. I have nothing to give." The figure approached slowly. "Everyone has something." Alex's heart beat in his chest. Thoughts were rushing. What could he give? What did he love most? And then the awareness hit him like a knife in the stomach. His sister, Les, knew. The shadows around him seemed to tremble with anticipation. Whispering voices moved again, piercing through the branches. "Name one. Give it to us." The tears were burning in Alex's eyes. He wanted to scream, to refuse, to fight, but the trees were approaching. Their faces in bark were distorted, their mouths opened wider in hungry anticipation. He didn't have time. And behold, with a broken voice, he whispered her name. For the first time, the forest is quiet. And then, it let him go. The moment Alex uttered his sister's name, the air around him changed. The heavy burden of the forest was gone, and the whispers disappeared. For the first time since he stepped into the forest, he heard silence. The creature in front of him bowed his head, as if satisfied. The surrounding trees that were pressing into it suddenly appeared indifferent. "Run!" The word flashed in his head, although the creature's mouth did not move. Alex did not hesitate. He turned and ran, running through the undergrowth, branches scratching his clothes, roots curling under his feet. But now the forest has not tried to stop him. That meant letting him go. The trees passed by, their grotesque faces no longer looked at me. His breath became broken when he finally broke through the tree line, stumbling over familiar ground. In the distance was a warm light from street lamps. He was at home. He did it. Or so he thought. Consequences. Something went wrong the next morning. His mother's screams broke the silence of their home. Alex rushed into his sister's room, feeling the terror of his stomach. She was still. Her eyes were open, but unfocused and staring at the ceiling. She breathed, but did not react. Perfect shell of herself, alive, but lost. The doctors couldn't explain it. There were no injuries, no illness. She just didn't wake up, and Alex knew why. He gave it to the forest. A whisper that never left days turned into weeks, then months. His sister stayed in the hospital without changing. His mother cried every night. Alex tried to convince himself that it was all a coincidence, that the forest was just a nightmare, that whispering was never real. But then, on the first night of autumn, when the wind was blowing outside the window, he heard it. Whisper. Software familiar. Call him by name. Alex ... He was still. All his body muscles were frozen in place. His breath collapsed. He turned slowly to the window. The glass was clogged, but there was a faint handprint, and behind the glass, right at the edge of the trees, stood a shadow. He was still. All his body muscles were frozen in place. His breath collapsed. He turned slowly to the window. The glass was clogged, but there was a faint handprint, and behind the glass, right at the edge of the trees, stood a shadow. Les called him back, and this time he will not be released. The whispering never stopped. Every night, as the wind rustled through the trees, Alex heard them. Soft, familiar voices calling his name, "Come back. Finish what you started. She is waiting." At first, he ignored them. He shut his windows, closed the curtains, and slept with music to drown them out. But the whispers always found a way in. Then the dreams begged. In his nightmares, he stood in the forest again, facing the creature with hollow eyes, screaming in silence, etched into the bark, eternal cry. "Bring me someone else," the creature whispered. "A trade for freedom." Alex awoke, gasping. It couldn't be real. It couldn't. Yet the next morning, as he passed his sister's hospital room, something felt wrong. Her hand had moved. Barely, just a twitch, but it moved, as if she were reaching for something or someone. Alex stood at the forest's edge, fists clenched. He knew what it wanted, a trade, another name, another soul. If he offered one, his sister might wake up, might return to him. But at what price? He gazed into the darkness between the trees, listening to the faint whispers. The wind felt almost inviting. Just one more. One more, and she is free. Alex took a deep breath, and then, slowly, he stepped forward. The forest welcomed him, and this time, he didn't run.